"You can have it," Eli said, his small mittened hand stretching forward. "It's a dinosaur cookie. Dinosaurs make you strong." The words cut through the winter silence like a bell. Jack Monroe spun toward his son, his boots crunching hard in the snow. At the edge of the dimly lit bus stop, a woman sat slumped on the bench, her shoulders wrapped in a coat that had seen better years. Strands of blonde hair clung to her cheeks matted with frost. Her lips were parted pale. Eli Jack's voice was sharp warning, "Back here, now." But the boy didn't move. He was standing a step too close, his eyes wide and unafraid, holding the cookie out like a peace offering. The woman blinked slowly, as if even opening her eyes was work. She glanced down at the cookie in her lap and whispered, voice hoarse, "I didn't ask for anything." Jack strode forward, pulling Eli gently but firmly to his side. He crouched in front of the stranger, his breath steaming in the cold. His janitor's jacket was still zipped to his chin, the keys at his belt clinking with each movement. He'd seen plenty of broken things in his line of work, doors, jammed pipes, burst lights dead, but this woman didn't look broken. She looked erased. "What are you doing with my son?" he asked, low protective. The woman raised trembling hands, palms open like she was surrendering. "Nothing. He just came over." Her voice cracked with dryness. "He's kind. That's all." Jack studied her face. Red where it shouldn't be red, white where it shouldn't be white. A fever heat radiated even in the frozen air. His instincts told him she was more than sick, she was on the edge. Dad Eli tugged his sleeve. She gave her food to a cat first. Jack turned, following his son's gesture. A scrawny stray pawed at crumbs in the snow, half a roll torn into pieces. The other half gone. Jack's chest tightened. The woman shifted as if trying to stand, and Jack saw the moment her strength gave out. Her knees buckled. She stumbled sideways into the metal post of the bus shelter with a hollow clang, then crumpled into the snow. Dad, Eli, cried. Jack was already moving. He knelt, brushing snow from her face, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. Pulse, weak, but there. He touched her forehead, startled by the fire beneath chilled skin. Fever, his jaw clenched. "Miss, can you hear me?" A faint sound left her lips, more a whimper than a word. No cars, no one in sight. Snow falling heavier by the minute. Jack glanced down at Eli, who was staring terrified. "She needs help," the boy whispered. "You fix things. You can fix her too." Jack inhaled once sharp. He could walk away, call an ambulance and hope they'd come in time, but the way she lay there fragile against the snow, it felt like the city itself had given up on her, and Jack knew that feeling all too well. Without another thought, he slid his arms under her, lifting her carefully. She was shockingly light. It felt as though the world had been stripping pieces from her, one by one. The coat fell open as he carried her, revealing bruises along her wrist and sleeves torn at the seams. She made no protest, only a faint sound as her head pressed against his chest. Dad Eli's voice was small now, trembling. "Is she gonna die?" Jack shifted his grip steady. "Not if we get her warm." They moved quickly, the snow crunching underfoot, Eli trotting at his side. Jack's house was only a few blocks, but every step felt longer, heavier. This woman wasn't his responsibility. He didn't know her name, her story, why fate had put her in his path tonight. But there was no turning back. By the time they reached the porch, Eli was whispering, almost certain, "She's our home now." Jack didn't answer. He just pushed open the door. Inside, the fire crackled in the old brick hearth, filling the room with a soft amber glow. Jack laid the woman on the long sofa, pulling a wool blanket over her. Her eyelashes fluttered, but she didn't wake. The room smelled faintly of cedar and cinnamon left over from Christmas, though the tree was long gone. Jack sat back on his heels, scanning her again, cracked lips a scrape raw across her hand, shallow breaths. He'd seen this look before in hospital corridors when Mara, his wife, had been fighting an illness she couldn't win. Eli perched on the rug, crayons already in hand, as if he could will this stranger into their world. His paper filled with bright colors, 3 stick figures holding hands. One tall, one small, and in the middle one with golden hair. Above them, in shaky block letters, he wrote, "My home." Jack exhaled heavy. When the woman stirred, her first sight was the drawing. Her eyes blinked open pale blue, meeting the bright scrawl of a child's hope. She tried to sit up but groaned, collapsing back. "You're awake." Eli scrambled to her side, holding up the picture. "That's us." Her voice was barely audible. "That's kind." Eli beamed. "Daddy says you can stay until you're better, but I think you should stay longer." Jack appeared, then setting down a glass of water and a small bowl of soup on the coffee table. His face gave nothing away. "You passed out in the snow," he said evenly. "I didn't have a choice. You needed help. When you're stronger, you'll leave." His tone wasn't cruel, just measured, like he was building a wall one brick at a time. The woman lowered her gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli lingered beside her, clearly wanting to chatter, but Jack gently took his son's hand. Let her rest. The rest of the day passed in hushed tones. At dinner, she insisted on sitting apart at the breakfast bar, careful not to intrude. She ate slowly, politely, her every movement rehearsed to avoid asking for more than was given. But when Eli began talking about school, about the costume he wanted for Halloween, about building a snow bakery in the yard, her lips curved just slightly. She kept her eyes down whenever Jack looked her way, but in the spaces between, she smiled at his boy like he was a lantern in the dark. Later, as she helped clear dishes, the loose sleeve of her borrowed sweater slipped down her arm. Jack saw it then, a scar, long and jagged, running across her wrist, faded but unmistakable. He said nothing, but the image carved itself into his memory. That night, long after the house was quiet, Jack lay awake, the silence loud as a storm. From the living room came a muffled sound, a soft whimper. He rose, padding barefoot to the couch. The woman was curled into herself, sweat glistening on her brow despite the chill. She stirred, a broken breath catching in her throat. Jack hesitated, phone in hand. And then, with the same instinct that carried her out of the snow, he dialed. An hour later, a private physician left into the night, shaking his head. Severe dehydration, fever at 102. Fluids, rest, warmth. She'll make it, but only with care and rest. Jack asked the question anyway, an insurance family. The woman stirred faintly, lips parting. "No one," she murmured. "There's no one who needs to know if I'm alive or not." The words hung in the room, heavy as frost on glass. Jack stood over her silent, watching her sleep. He didn't know her story, but he knew pain when he saw it. He'd seen it in the mirror too many nights, and for the first time in years he realized maybe not every door was meant to stay locked. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the world outside covered in a brittle silence. Morning light crept through the thin curtains of Jack's living room, painting soft bars of gold across the wooden floor. On the sofa, the woman stirred. She blinked at the glow of the fire, at the warmth wrapped around her in the form of a wool blanket. Her throat ached when she whispered, "Where?" "Am I from the kitchen?" Jack's voice carried steady, cautious. "You're in my house. You collapsed. You should be thankful you're not still lying in the snow." His words were firm, not cruel, stacked like bricks, each one deliberate. She tried to sit up, pushing against the pillow, but her body protested. She gave up, sinking back. The blanket smelled faintly of cedar and detergent. It felt impossibly clean, like something she no longer deserved. Her gaze shifted, and there he was, standing in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered uniform jacket, zipped, a ring of keys hanging from his belt. His eyes were unreadable, but his jaw was tight as though he'd clenched it all night. Jack crossed the room, set a glass of water on the table beside her. "Drink," he said simply. She obeyed, sipping carefully. The water was cold, but it burned going down, reminding her how long it had been since she'd cared for herself. "Daddy," a voice piped up. She turned. A boy sat cross-legged on the rug, crayons scattered around him. His tongue stuck out in concentration as he scribbled on a page. He looked up at her with the kind of unguarded hope only children still carried. "You woke up," Eli announced with pride. "See, I drew us." He held up the paper. 3 stick figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun. One tall, one small, and one with golden hair. Over their heads, scrawled in shaky block letters, were the words, "My home." The woman's chest tightened. She blinked fast, but the sting behind her eyes refused to go. "That's beautiful," she whispered. Eli grinned. "That's you. You can stay until you're better. Daddy said so." Jack shot his son a look sharp enough to warn, gentle enough to avoid wounding. "What I said," he corrected, "is that she'll leave when she's strong enough." He turned to her. "This isn't permanent, just until you can walk out on your own." The woman lowered her gaze. "I understand. Thank you for letting me in, even for one night." Jack didn't reply. He crouched beside Eli, tapped his shoulder. "Shoes, you'll be late." Eli groaned but obeyed, scampering upstairs. Left alone, the woman tried to read Jack's expression. He stood at the edge of the room like a man guarding something: his house, his son, his heart. She pulled the blanket tighter. "I won't cause trouble," she murmured. He studied her for a long moment before answering. Trouble usually doesn't announce itself. It just shows up and stays. Later, while Eli was at school, she moved slowly into the kitchen. Her body still ached, but she couldn't bear lying idle any longer. She opened a cabinet, scanning its modest contents: beans, onions, the heel of a loaf. Her hands remembered motions she hadn't used in months. When Jack returned from a quick errand, he froze. The air was filled with the scent of simmering broth, thyme, and ginger. She was standing at the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pulled back loosely. "I thought I said rest," he said, setting down a bag of supplies. She glanced over her shoulder, a faint smile tugging at lips that had forgotten how. "I can rest easier when I've done something useful." He approached, took a spoon, and tasted the soup. The flavor hit him like a punch. Rosemary, pepper, and something softer. Something sweet that lingered at the back of his throat. His late wife's recipe. He set the spoon down slowly. His voice was steady but softer than usual. "Where did you learn this?" "From an old couple in Queens," she said simply. "They taught me how to turn scraps into comfort." Jack swallowed, unsettled. He didn't want her presence to remind him of Mara, but in that moment it did. And yet it wasn't imitation. It was coincidence or fate, or something else he couldn't name. They sat to eat. She placed her bowl apart from theirs at the breakfast bar, her posture careful like a guest determined not to overstay. Eli chattered about school, about dinosaurs and math, and how he wanted to build a snow castle. She listened, eyes bright, laughter caught just behind her lips. But every time Jack looked her way, her eyes drifted to the floorboards, unwilling to meet his stare. That evening, after Eli had gone to bed, she insisted on helping wash dishes. Jack dried silently, his eyes catching the faint scar across her wrist when her sleeve slipped back. A raised, jagged line pale against her skin. He said nothing, but the image dug deep. "You don't have to let me stay," she said, suddenly breaking the quiet. His head lifted. "I already told you. Until you're better, that's it." Her lips curved with something close to sorrow. "Kindness from strangers is dangerous. People expect something in return." Jack set the dish towel down, meeting her eyes at last. "Not here. I don't expect anything, except honesty." She inhaled, held his gaze longer than before. Something flickered there. Pain pride, secrets she wasn't ready to release. She nodded, once turned back to the sink. Later that night, the house was silent except for the ticking of the old clock. Jack sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. He stared at the screen of his laptop, the glow painting sharp lines across his face. He typed her description, her age, her features. The results came fast. CEO Isabel Hart accused of embezzlement. Archer & Co. rocked by scandal. Disgraced executive vanishes. Jack's stomach tightened. He'd let a headline walk into his living room. Her face filled the screen, sleek hair-tailored suit confidence carved into her posture. She looked nothing like the woman asleep on his couch. But the name, the accusations, they were hers. Jack leaned back, his chest heavy. He wanted to believe she was just a lost soul, someone who'd stumbled into his path by accident. But the internet told another story, and Jack knew better than anyone, stories always came with a price. Upstairs, Eli murmured in his sleep. Jack closed the laptop, rubbing his eyes. Tomorrow, he would have to ask her who she really was. For now, he sat in the quiet listening to the faint crackle of the fire, wondering if he had let danger into his home, or the one person who might change everything. Jack Monroe wasn't a man who read the news. Headlines always felt like noise shouting matches about people in glass towers while he pushed his mop across marble floors. But that morning, the news came looking for him. The old TV in the building's basement lounge hummed as he refilled the vending machine. His eyes drifted up absently, then froze. On the screen was a face he knew. Her hair was messy in the mugshot, the image grainy, harsh. Yet, even through it, Jack recognized the woman sleeping under his roof. Isabel Hart. The anchor's voice dripped with mock sympathy. Isabel Hart, once the golden girl of Archer & Company, now stands accused of embezzlement, fraud, and corporate negligence that left hundreds unemployed. Once a symbol of power, she's become a cautionary tale. Jack's jaw clenched. He muttered under his breath, "Well, damn." That evening, when he stepped into his kitchen, Isabel was seated beside Eli, helping him cut paper snowflakes. Her fingers guided his small hands, patient and careful. Eli's laugh filled the room. Cheeks flushed from concentration. Jack lingered in the doorway, torn. The TV's accusations still echoed. He finally cleared his throat. "So, should I call you Miss Hart instead of the stranger on my couch?" Isabel froze. The scissors slipped slightly, leaving a crooked tear in the paper. She didn't look up. "You saw it?" Jack stepped closer, his voice hard. "The whole city's talking. Former CEO, millions gone, workers out on the street. That's you, slowly." Isabel set the scissors down. When she turned, her eyes weren't defiant, just tired. "That's the name they buried me under, and yes, it's mine." Eli blinked, confused. "Dad," Jack's tone cut sharper. "So, is any of it true?" She inhaled, steadying herself. "I didn't take a cent. They wanted a scapegoat, someone polished enough to distract from the real rot, so they painted the villain on me." Her words hung in the air like glass about to shatter. Jack wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But years of cleaning up other people's messes had taught him one rule: survival makes liars out of everyone. He crossed his arms. Convenient story. Hard to fact-check. Eli's small voice broke the silence. She wouldn't lie. "She helped me draw a dinosaur family today. People who lie don't do that." Jack almost snapped back, but those earnest eyes stopped him cold. Isabel. Rose's shoulders squared, though her hands trembled. "I'll make it easy. I'll go." She turned toward the door, carrying herself with that stubborn grace only the fallen seemed to wear. Eli panicked. He scrambled off his chair, chasing after her. "Wait. Don't leave." In his rush, his sock caught on the rug. He stumbled and hit the floor hard, a sharp cry bursting out. Eli Jack lunged, but Isabel was faster. She was already kneeling, lifting the boy, gently checking the scrape on his elbow. "It's just a scratch," she murmured, tearing a strip from the dish towel and wrapping it with steady hands. Her voice softened, warm and sure. But brave knights always wear their scars with honor. Eli sniffled, then managed a small smile. "Like a knight." "Exactly," Isabel said, brushing the hair from his forehead. "And knights never let their friends fight alone." Jack stood rooted. For the first time he saw past the headlines, past the mugshot. In that moment she wasn't a disgraced CEO, she was simply human. But his guard stayed up. "You patch him up nice," he muttered, masking the ache in his chest. "Doesn't mean you're telling the truth." Her gaze held his weary, yet unflinching. "Believe me or don't. I'm not here to prove anything. I stayed because your son was kind to me when no one else was." She rose, still holding Eli's hand. "I'll leave in the morning. No arguments." Eli gripped tighter. "Please don't go." Jack swallowed hard. There it was again, that innocence that always cut deeper than truth or lies. His son's faith in people, the very faith Jack had long abandoned. Later that night, with Eli asleep, Jack sat alone at the kitchen table. The only sound was the ticking clock, his eyes fixed on the dish towel stained from Eli's scrape. The news called her a criminal. His gut called her trouble, but his son saw family. Jack pressed his palms to his eyes' shoulders, heavy with an ache he thought he'd buried. "Mara," he whispered to the ghost of his late wife. "What the hell am I supposed to do with this woman?" From the living room came the faintest sound, a muffled sob pressed into a pillow. She thought no one could hear, and for the first time in years, Jack Monroe, the janitor who swore he'd never let another soul under his roof, felt something crack open inside, a question that wouldn't leave him. What if Eli's right? By morning, the house felt heavier than the snow outside. Jack rose early the way men who carried too much always did and found Isabel already dressed, her coat folded neatly over her arm. She stood in the kitchen doorway like a shadow about to disappear. "I'll be gone before he wakes," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands clutched the fabric too tightly. Jack poured coffee into a chipped mug, not meeting her eyes. "That's probably for the best." Silence filled the small kitchen, broken only by the whistle of wind sneaking through the window frame. She turned to leave. Then the soft shuffle of feet on the stairs stopped her. Miss Isabel Eli's sleepy voice carried through. His blonde hair stuck out in every direction, his dinosaur pajama top sagging on his shoulders. "Where are you going?" Isabel froze. "Back. To where I belong." Eli blinked, then shook his head fiercely. "You belong here, with us." Jack's chest tightened. He wanted to correct his son, remind him that the world didn't bend to an 8-year-old's heart. But before he could, Isabel knelt, meeting Eli's eyes. "Sweet boy," she whispered, brushing his cheek. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know you're kind," Eli replied, "and Dad says kind people are rare, so if we find one, we shouldn't let them go." Jack's mug rattled against the counter. He hadn't realized his son remembered those words he himself had muttered years ago after Mara's funeral. Isabel's lips parted, trembling just enough for Eli to notice. She kissed the top of his head, then rose, her face unreadable. "I'll think about it." That afternoon, Jack came home from school to find the strangest sight: Isabel, in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, flour dusting her hands. "What in the hell?" he muttered. She didn't look up. "Bread. It's cheaper than buying it. And your oven still works." On the counter, 3 loaves rested beneath towels, the smell of yeast and salt filling the home like something sacred. Eli sat at the table, pencil in hand. "She's helping me with math, too. Fractions are like bread, you cut the whole into pieces." Jack stood there, caught between disbelief and something else he refused to name. "I thought you were leaving." "I was," Isabel said, still kneading the dough with steady hands. "But I've decided to stay, not as your guest, as your co-worker." Jack arched a brow. "Co-worker. You said this house doesn't run itself, so let me run part of it. I'll cook, I'll help with Eli, I'll contribute. That way I don't owe you, and you don't owe me." Her tone wasn't pleading, it was stubborn proud. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, torn between irritation and admiration. "You don't know the first thing about living like this." Isabel pressed the dough down firmly. "Then I'll learn. You think I've never failed before?" She glanced around the modest kitchen. "This is nothing compared to standing in a boardroom while men strip your name from the walls you built." Jack said nothing, but something in him cracked. He'd seen hollow pride before. This wasn't that. This was a woman clawing back dignity. Days bled into rhythm. Isabel washed dishes, folded laundry, even held Eli's hand when crossing icy streets. Her first pot of stew burned black, and Jack had to throw open the windows. She laughed, embarrassed, and Eli teased, "Don't worry, Dad burns toast all the time." Jack found himself laughing too, the sound rusty but real. At night, after Eli slept, Jack sometimes caught Isabel by the fire with a notebook. She wasn't writing numbers or plans, but sketches, dresses, buildings, birds. Once he saw her crumple a page, then smooth it out again as though forgiving herself. One evening, Jack returned from an extra shift to find Eli proudly holding up a drawing. "Look, Dad, Miss Isabel showed me how to shade with the side of the pencil. Doesn't it look real?" Jack leaned down. It was a picture of 3 figures, him, Eli, and Isabel, beneath a crooked little house with a sun above. His throat tightened. He glanced at Isabel, who quickly looked away, cheeks flushed. "You don't have to do this," he said softly once Eli had dashed upstairs for more paper. She met his gaze. "Do what? Pretend?" Her jaw set. "I'm not pretending. I'm rebuilding. Maybe not an empire, but something that matters more. A place where I can be useful. A place where I'm not just what they say I am." Jack searched her face, etched with weariness and will. For the first time he believed she wasn't here to hide, she was here to heal. Later, with Eli asleep, Isabel cleaned the kitchen. Jack leaned in the doorway, studying her quietly. "You're not what I expected," he said at last. She turned. "And what did you expect? I expected you to run. People usually do once life takes away their crown." Her gaze didn't waver. "I lost everything, Jack. My name, my company, my so-called friends. All I have left is a choice: keep walking into the dark or stay where there's still light." He nodded slowly, the words hitting deeper than he'd admit. "And you think you'll find light here in a janitor's house?" Her smile was faint, but it held. Maybe the brightest kind. The kind that doesn't need chandeliers. Jack looked at her then, not the headlines, not the shame, but the woman who had chosen to bake bread in his kitchen like salvation. And though he didn't say it, something in him whispered that maybe, just maybe, letting her stay wasn't the mistake he feared. For the first time in years, Jack Monroe didn't dread tomorrow. The Maple Street Community Kitchen didn't so much open its doors as it lifted a curtain. Steam rose from industrial pots, warm and fragrant, turning the cold morning into a stage of stainless steel and purpose. Isabel stood at a prep table, tying an apron too big for her, the strap cinched tight. Her hands shook once, and she hid it by reaching for a loaf. Ruth Delgado, the volunteer lead with silver hair and the posture of a retired nurse, slid a tray beside her. "Bread, first soup, second," Ruth said. "We feed people with our eyes and noses before we ever feed their stomachs. And one more rule." She looked Isabel in the eye. "In here, we serve dignity." "Yes, ma'am," Isabel answered, surprised by how right the word felt in her mouth. Jack arrived a beat later with Eli. The boy barreled in all elbows and grins. "Where do I help?" he asked, already reaching for anything within arm's length. "You young man are on napkin duty," Ruth said, handing him a mountain of forks. "Roll 'em tight. Soldiers need tidy uniforms." Eli saluted like he meant it. Jack took his place at the slicing board, sleeves rolled up a hairnet perched stubbornly over his hair. He glanced sideways at Isabel. "You sure about this?" She set the first loaf down, pressed her palm to its warm crust. "If I can make a mess in your kitchen, I can make order in this one. Then softer, I need to give something good back to the world." He nodded once. "Then we'll start with bread." By noon, the line stretched out, the doormen with calloused hands, women with tired eyes, a veteran with a careful gait, a girl in a pink coat gripping her mother's hand too tight. The first ladle of stew was always the heaviest. Isabel lifted it like a promise and poured. "Thank you," said the veteran, his eyes catching hers and holding. "Haven't smelled home like this in a while. You're welcome," she said, and her voice did not tremble. For 20 minutes the kitchen was a choreography, Ruth calling orders with a warm bark. Eli rolling cutlery with the seriousness of a surgeon, Jack slicing loaf after loaf, salt bread, heat hands. The soup flowed like a river of second chances. Then the air shifted. A man in a grease-stained work jacket stepped forward. Jaw tight, eyes narrowed. He had the look of someone who'd been waiting to be angry for a long time. His gaze locked on Isabel's face and froze. Recognition hit him like a slap. "You," he said, voice slicing through the clatter. "You've got some nerve." Isabel's ladle hovered. "Sir, would you like—" "I'd like my job back," he snapped. "I'd like my cousin's mortgage paid on time. I'd like the warehouse you hollowed out running again." A ripple moved down the line. Heads turned. Even the steam seemed to still. Jack set down his knife. Ruth stepped forward. "Sir, you know the rules." "We don't." "I know who she is," he said, ignoring her eyes locked on Isabel. "Isabel Hart, the thief, the one who smiled on magazine covers while my people got pink slips." Isabel's knuckles whitened on the table edge, but her voice stayed even. "I'm sorry you lost your job." "That's not an answer," he spat. "No," she said, lifting her chin a fraction. "It's the truth I can offer without turning this line into a courtroom. This kitchen is for feeding people, not fighting the internet." He laughed, bitter and sharp. "Easy to talk about dignity when you're on the ladle side." Jack moved then, placing his shoulder beside Isabel's. The man tried to peer around him, but Jack didn't yield. "In this room," Jack said, voice calm, but carrying, "we serve food, not rumors. If you're hungry, I'll fill your bowl. If you want to fight, take it outside. But you don't get to starve the people behind you because you recognized my guest." "Your guest," the man sneered. "She wrecked lives. Headlines." "Wreck context," Jack answered. "Hunger doesn't care either way." Silence pressed hard against the tile. Eli looked up from his stack of rolled napkins, eyes wide. Ruth's mouth was a thin line, but her hand rested briefly on Jack's forearm, a quiet thank you. The man's gaze darted between Jack and Isabel. He wanted a crowd. Instead, he found a line that wanted to eat. A woman, 2 spots back, raised her hand. "Sir, my kid needs lunch." Something in him faltered. He shoved the bowl forward, not at Isabel, but at Jack. "Fill it," he barked, then lower. "Not from her." Jack didn't blink. He turned to Isabel deliberately. "Would you do the honor?" Her hands steadied. She dipped the ladle, poured until the bowl was generous, then tore a piece of bread, uneven honest, and placed it on the tray. "Salt and bread," she said quietly. "What people share when they mean to keep each other alive." The man's jaw worked. He took the tray. For a heartbeat, his eyes flickered with something like shame. Then he moved on. The line exhaled. Pots resumed their soft applause. The girl in the pink coat stepped forward, peeking over the table. "Thank you, ma'am," she whispered. Isabel's throat tightened. "You're welcome, sweetheart." She slipped an extra piece of bread onto her plate. "For courage." By the time the last bowl was filled, Isabel's back ached, but something inside her, something she thought dead, was warm. Ruth clapped once, brisk and proud. "That she said is what we call a shift." Then to Isabel, "You kept your hand steady when the room didn't. That's rare." "I don't feel steady," Isabel admitted. "That's how I know you're honest," Ruth said. "Come back tomorrow." As they cleaned, the man in the work jacket lingered at the door, his rage quieter. He said nothing, just looked at the 3 of them and left without slamming anything. Out on Maple Street, the cold reached under their coats. Eli grabbed both their hands, his mitten in Jack's, his other in Isabel's. "Did we do good?" he asked. Jack squeezed his fingers. "We fed people. That's always good." Isabel stared at their joined hands, breath clouding the air. "When you stood beside me," she said so softly. Jack almost missed it. Everything stopped shaking. He glanced at her. No pity, no sermon, just the steadiness of a man who'd fixed pipes and broken hinges all his life. "Then I'll keep standing." They walked home under a light that made the snow look almost blue. In the kitchen, Jack warmed the last of the stew. Isabel sliced the leftover loaves, their bread, not the kitchen's, and set the salt shaker in the center of the table like a small bright flag. Eli took a bite and sighed with the contentment of kings. "It tastes like the place we were today," he said. "What's that taste like?" Jack asked. "Like people?" Eli answered seriously. "Like when you share the warm part of you." Isabel's laugh was quiet but whole. She sprinkled salt over her bread and looked at Jack. "You said once salt ruins everything when there's too much." He nodded. But today she said it told the truth. About the soup, about the room, about me. Salt doesn't hide anything, it makes the real thing show up. Jack held her gaze. For the first time in years, the air between him and another soul felt simple. Not light, not heavy, just honest. "Then here's my truth," he said. I don't know what the world will call you next week, but in my house, I'll call you what my son already does." Isabel swallowed. "What's that?" "Someone who stayed." Outside, the wind worried the eaves. Inside, the room kept its own weather bread cooling on the counter soup soft on the stove and a quiet you only earn by standing where it's hardest. After dishes, Eli tugged Isabel toward the living room. "Can we draw?" "What happened?" he asked. "What did happen?" she teased. He thought, then nodded to himself. "A mean wave tried to knock you over. But Dad stood like a rock. And you," he looked up at her, certain you learned you're the ocean too. Her eyes stung. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's draw that." Jack watched them spread paper on the rug, the fire climbing in the grate. He wasn't a man who cried easily. Repairmen save tears for when there's no water to mop. But as Eli sketched a line of people with bowls, and Isabel shaded a steady hand on a ladle, Jack felt something undo inside his chest. Not grief, not fear. Relief faintly salted, faintly bread warm. Saturday arrived with a cold that gnawed at the bones of the old elementary school where Jack kept the boilers humming and the hallways honest. A pipe in the annex had been complaining all week. The principal called at dawn, and Jack answered the way he always did, no fuss, just a toolbox and a promise. Eli tagged along in his puffer coat, bobbing beside him like a little blue balloon. Isabel came too, a thermos tucked under her arm, her scarf wound twice around her neck as if courage needed an extra layer. "Basement," Jack said, pushing open the service door. "It's ugly down there." "I've seen uglier," Isabel replied, and he couldn't tell if she meant boardrooms or headlines. The boiler room smelled of dust and iron. Water pinged through the pipes. Jack set his toolbox on a scarred old workbench wood worn smooth by years of fixes. He handed Eli the flashlight. "You're my eyes. I'm also your sound effects," Eli declared, clicking the beam on with a theatrical flourish. Isabel hovered at the threshold, taking in the concrete walls, the snarl of conduit, the chalk marks where someone, probably Jack, had scrawled measurements only he could read. She lifted the thermos. Coffee for the foreman, tea for morale. Jack took the coffee with a grunt of thanks. He knelt by the groaning valve, wedged the wrench into place, and gave it a turn. Metal complained, then eased like a spine cracked into relief. "There you go," he murmured. "No more singing." Eli's beam wandered along the cinder block. "Dad, what's this?" He crouched. "There's a little door." Jack straightened. At knee height, half hidden behind a mop sink, a metal panel had blended into the wall, painted the same chalky gray disguised by dust and time. In the center, a brass coin of a keyhole waited dark and patient. Isabel stepped closer. "That can't be standard." "It isn't," Jack said softly. He wiped the grime with his sleeve. Beneath a faint etching emerged a crude little lighthouse scratched into the metal stubborn as faith. Eli whispered, "What does it open?" Jack didn't answer immediately. His hand went to his pocket where a brass key had lived for years, old, unassuming, notched, unlike the others. He had never used it, barely dared to look at it. Mara had pressed it into his palm in a hospital room that smelled of lemons and endings. For when you need to believe in the light again, she had said, her voice thin but fierce. He had nodded because arguing with a dying woman was harder than lying to himself. Dad Eli's flashlight was steady. Isabel's eyes too present, not prying. Jack knelt. The key trembled once in his grip, then steadied. It slid into the brass throat like it had been waiting all this time for his hand. The lock turned with a tired click. The panel swung inward with the soft sigh of a secret finally told. Inside was a cavity shallow as a breath holding a shoebox wrapped in brown paper and twine. On the paper, in Mara's tidy hand, Lighthouse. No one spoke. Jack lifted it gently to the bench as if it might break and unwrapped it. Inside lay a manila folder, edges rounded by time with a small flash drive taped to the cover. On top, a Polaroid Mara, at a windswept coast hair, whipped wild across her smile, a white tower rising behind her. On the bottom margin her ink endured, "Light needs a keeper." Isabel's breath caught. "Jack." "What is this?" he swallowed. Something my wife wanted me to find when I was ready. I wasn't. Not until now. Can we, Isabel? Began then stopped. Jack nodded. He opened the folder. Copies, dozens of them, vendor ledgers, wire transfers, P&L snippets. Mara's hand circled amounts in red drawing patterns invisible until placed side by side. In the margins, notes like breadcrumbs. Northgate Logistics, no physical office. Check EIN. Weekend batching repeat invoices. Shell Harbor Ridge, LLC. Caymans. Isabel stepped forward, bracing herself on the bench. She recognized the codes instantly, the cost centers, the approval initials. This wasn't rumor. This was Archer & Co., her old life stripped to its bones. Her finger stopped on a set of initials. MC. Jack looked up. Mason Calder. Her jaw tightened. COOO. The one who insisted we fast-track vendors to stay nimble. She skimmed another page. Ghost vendors. Bleeding small sums across dozens of accounts so nothing screamed theft. It's textbook. The word landed like betrayal. Eli tugged Jack's sleeve. Is this bad guy stuff? Jack smoothed his son's hair. It's wrong stuff, and wrong stuff grows in the dark. At the back of the folder lay a clipped email, redacted subject, quarter and adjustments. In the margin, Mara had scrawled, "If anyone will listen, Hart might." And beneath, smaller still, she keeps asking the right questions. Isabel staggered as though the floor tilted. She knew me. Jack's voice thickened. Mara could read people. She knew who kept their word even when it hurt. Isabel pressed her palm to her eyes. When she lowered it, her composure was cracked, but cracks let light through. I did question Mason's vendors. Weeks later, the board summoned me with a narrative already printed. I thought I missed something, that I deserved it. Her fingers lingered on the folder gentler now. I didn't. Jack turned the Polaroid over. On the back, Mara's writing. If this never reaches the right room, put it in the right hands. He looked at Isabel. She met his gaze without flinching. This puts a target on you, she whispered. On Eli. Mason will bury us if we move wrong. Jack exhaled. He's already buried enough. We're just digging up what survived. She shook her head, caught between awe and fear. Why hide it here? Because people like Mason never look where they see no value, Jack said. Janitors know every door. Eli's eyes were huge, flashlight trembling. Are we going to the police? Not yet, Jack said. You don't hand a storm to a roof that leaks. He tapped the flash drive. We verify. We keep this safe. We choose when the light comes on. Isabel nodded the CEO in her rousing like a long-sleeping animal. Cross-check the EINs, trace the shells align with board approvals. No accusation without a map. Her mouth lifted almost a smile. My father said truth without structure is just noise. Eli grinned. You're both talking the same. Jack raised an eyebrow. That ever happened before? Sometimes about pancakes. They laughed and the sound filled the concrete room warmer than any boiler. Jack slid the papers back into the folder, tucked it into his bag. The key returned to his ring not as a burden now, but a compass. Isabel brushed the lighthouse etching on the panel. She named it right, she murmured. Lighthouse. Light doesn't chase ships, Jack said. It stands where it's needed. He closed the door, turned the key, and pocketed it for good. Darkness reclaimed the room, but it felt different now, like small promises had grown larger. On the stairs, Eli asked, Is Mara watching us? Jack didn't give him a platitude. He glanced at Isabel, then the boy, then the scuffed steps. She left instructions, he said. That's close. Outside, the afternoon sky wore a thin blue veil. Isabel paused, staring at the frost-crusted swing sets and faded hopscotch grid. I used to think saving a company was the point, she said quietly. Now I think it's saving the people who live in its shadow. Jack adjusted the strap on his bag. Companies come and go. Boys need breakfast. Truth needs a keeper. He nodded back toward the school. Turns out, mine left me the manual. They reached the truck. Eli scrambled inside, still buzzing. Isabel lingered at the passenger door. breath clouding in the cold. "What happens now?" she asked. Jack looked at the brass key, catching the last strip of winter sun glowing as if lit from within. "Now," he said, "we hold the light steady." The basement's dust still clung to Jack's lungs, the scent of iron and mildew trailing him upstairs like a ghost. The folder, labeled Lighthouse, sat untouched on the table, yet its weight pressed against his chest as if he still carried it. For years, Mara's key had been nothing but a relic he couldn't part with. Now it had pried open a door he wasn't sure he wanted unlocked. Isabel sat across from him at the kitchen table. The lamplight cast tired shadows beneath her eyes. Eli had left a cup of tea at her elbow, but she hadn't touched it. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve until she finally spoke. "You deserve the truth," she said, her gaze pinned to the wood grain. "About me. About Mason. About why the world calls me a thief." Jack leaned back, arms crossed his face, unreadable, but inside something coiled tight. He had wanted this moment, dreaded it, and needed it all at once. "Then give it to me," he said quietly. No smoke, no mirrors, just the truth. Her breath trembled. "Mason Archer," she began barely above a whisper, "my COO, my second in command. I trusted him. He's the one who moved the money. He built the shell accounts, the false invoices, and when the hammer fell, he needed someone the board could burn." At last, her eyes met his, pleading for something beyond judgment. That someone was me. Jack's jaw ticked. "And you just let them." Her lips pressed thin. "Do you think I had a choice?" The board didn't ask questions, they wanted blood. My name was worth more as a sacrifice than Mason's ever would be, and he knew it. The old clock on the wall ticked into the silence. Jack thought of Mara, how she'd whispered of corruption she couldn't name before the sickness stole her voice. His words came sharper than he intended. "Why didn't you fight harder? Why didn't you scream the truth before they crucified you?" Her breath hitched. She closed her eyes, then opened them, tears brimming. "I did scream," she whispered. "But when no one listens, screaming just makes you hoarse. I lost everything. My career, my friends, my name. I walked out of that boardroom and the world had already decided. Do you know what it's like to walk into a room and watch every pair of eyes look away?" The words pierced him. He knew something of silence, too, after Mara. People hadn't blamed him. They had just avoided him. Grief made them uncomfortable, and in that mirror of loneliness he saw her. Jack's voice softened. "I know what it's like to lose everything." Her eyes flicked to his, waiting, and for once he let the lock turn on his own heart. When Mara died, he said slowly, each syllable heavy, "I thought the world ended. She wasn't just my wife. She was the only one who saw me, not the janitor, not the man sweeping corners. Just me. When the fire took her, it took the part of me that believed I could ever love again. So I built walls. For Eli. For myself. Because if you don't open the door, you can't lose what's inside." Isabel's hand twitched, wanting to reach for him, but stopping short. Her voice came tender, raw, and now, "Do you still believe those walls will keep you safe?" He couldn't answer. The silence thickened, fragile as glass. Isabel let herself imagine for a flicker what it would be like if his walls weren't so high, if that warmth in his eyes could be hers. But then she heard it in his voice, the way he said Mara's name, not with pain, but reverence. She realized with a sting he still measured the present against the past. "I can't be her, Jack," Isabel said suddenly, her voice trembling. His eyes widened. "I never asked you to be." "No," she said gently, rising. "But I feel it. In every look, every hesitation. Mara is in every corner of this house, every silence, and maybe she should be. But She swallowed hard. "I can't live as a shadow, always standing in the echo of someone you loved first." Jack stood quickly, his chair scraping. "That's not fair." Mara was your life," Isabel said softly but firmly. "I'm just a guest passing through." Her words shattered something between them. At that moment, Eli's small footsteps padded in his sleepy voice, breaking the storm. "Miss Isabel," he asked, rubbing his eyes, "you're not leaving, are you?" Isabel froze, her heart twisted. She knelt and brushed his hair back. "No, sweetheart, not tonight." Jack's chest ached as he watched the gratitude for her kindness battling the ache of what had cracked open. When she rose, her eyes were softer, but guarded. "I'll stay. For Eli. But for us, Jack. I don't know if staying will heal or only break us both." She turned toward the guest room, her footsteps fading down the hall. Jack remained in the kitchen, the lamplight flickering across his clenched hands. He had spoken truths buried for years, and yet somehow all he'd done was open another wound. The rumor didn't arrive like a whisper. It came like sirens. By noon, a headline was already climbing the feeds. Isabel, heart to flee. Country exclusive. An unnamed board insider claimed she'd liquidated assets and was planning to cross the border by week's end. A grainy photo, her or someone with her hair at a bus terminal, sealed the lie. Jack read it on his phone in the school hallway, the blue glow sharpening the knots already forming in his chest. He texted Isabel one word. Home. Now. When he and Eli turned onto their street, an SUV idled across from the house, cameras balanced on tripods like vultures at rest. The reporters weren't shouting yet. They were smiling wider and wider as the truck approached. "Dad," Eli whispered, "why are they here?" "Because someone's afraid of the truth," Jack said, pulling into the driveway and angling the truck so the front door was a straight line from his side. "Stay behind me." Isabel was on the porch, her face pale but set. The moment Jack stepped out, a young man in an expensive coat called Ms. Hart. "Are you fleeing? Is it true you stole?" Jack didn't look at him. "Not on my property," he said flatly. "Back to the sidewalk. Public interest." "Public sidewalk," Jack corrected, holding the door open for Isabel. She let out a breath she'd been holding for hours. Inside, the phone on the counter was already stacking voicemails. Isabel held out her hands in apology that wasn't hers to make. "I didn't start this. I know who did." Jack said, "A man who thinks shadows can eat the light." A knock, heavy official, rattled the door. Jack glanced through the peephole. 2 uniforms, winter hats, low breath, puffing white. He opened halfway, the chain still on. "Afternoon," Mr. Monroe, the taller one, asked. "Detective Ruiz. This is Officer Lang. We're here to speak with Ms. Hart." "What's the purpose?" "Following up on tips she's preparing to evade a pending investigation," Ruiz said. "We'd like her to come with us for questioning downtown." "Do you have a warrant?" Jack asked. "Not at this moment," Ruiz admitted. "But we can wait while one's drafted, or Ms. Hart can voluntarily accompany us." Behind Jack, Isabel stood tall. "Detective, I'm not evading anything. Tell me the scope of your questions, and I'll schedule with counsel." The detective's eyes flicked toward the street where the cameras leaned in. "Ma'am, I'd rather not make a scene." "Then don't," Jack said. "No warrant, no entry. She'll answer with a lawyer present." Ruiz studied him, then nodded, once professional, not hostile. "We'll be outside for a few minutes." He gestured to the sidewalk, and the reporters stepped back in rehearsed unison. The house seemed to hold its breath. On the table lay Mara's folder, Lighthouse. The flash drive, plain and black, was taped to the inside cover like a heart someone was trying to keep alive. Isabel looked at it, then at the door. "If they get a warrant, they'll take anything they can call electronic storage. That drive disappears into evidence, or worse." Jack's hand moved before fear could stop him. He peeled the tape free, pocketed the drive, then slid the folder into a grocery bag and handed it to Eli. "Buddy," he said softly, "Ruth's on Maple. Straight there. Give this into her hands. Tell her to lock it where only she can open it." Eli's eyes widened. "Is it a secret mission?" "The important kind," Jack said. "No shortcuts, not a word to anyone else." Eli nodded, solemn as a soldier. Isabel knelt and cupped his face. "Run, like your feet know the road. I'll be right here." He bolted out the side door into the narrow cut between houses, a path reporters rarely noticed. Jack watched until the blue of Eli's jacket vanished behind a hedge. Only then did he breathe. Another knock. This time it wasn't a fist. It was the flat slap of paper. Ruiz's voice carried, "Mr. Monroe, we now have a signed warrant to seize electronic devices belonging to Ms. Hart and to take her statement. We'll attempt to execute this with respect." Jack opened red underlined with his finger. "This covers devices belonging to Ms. Hart. It does not cover my property or my son's." "Respect that line." "Understood," Ruiz said. Jack stepped aside, keeping his body between curious eyes and the kitchen drawer. Isabel offered her phone and her small travel tablet, the only thing she had. Ruiz bagged them carefully. "Ma'am," Ruiz said gently, "will you come with us now? You'll be released after a statement." Isabel's shoulders lifted, fell. She glanced toward the side yard where the shape of her life had just sprinted away with a paper bag and a promise. Without counsel, she asked. "You can call from the station," Ruiz said. Jack shook his head. "She's not leaving without a lawyer." "Then we'll wait," Ruiz replied, patient but unyielding. The waiting was the trap's sharpest tooth. Outside, cameras snapped their nervous music. The rumor was becoming story, the story becoming evidence of itself. Isabel stood still as a pinned butterfly. "Mason's winning," she murmured. He wanted a frame, and he got one. Jack stepped closer low, so only she could hear. He got noise. "We have light." She looked up, fear clearing enough for the CEO in her to surface. "Light gets people burned." "Only if they hold it alone," he said. A tapping at the back window. 3 quick, 2 slow, made Jack turn. Ruth's face appeared in the glass, cheeks, flushed eyes fierce. Jack cracked the door. "Safe," she whispered, answering the question he hadn't asked. "Locked where only God and my high school locker combination know." Then louder, "I brought a casserole because I heard your stove went on strike." Ruiz, to his credit, looked away and pretended casserole delivery was routine. Ruth stepped in, put the dish on the counter, and wrapped Isabel in a hug that smelled of thyme and soap. "Heads high," she said. "Wolves hate that." The next hour unfolded in inches. Calls were made. A local attorney who owed Ruth 3 favors arrived brisk and calm. Statements were scheduled, not coerced. Ruiz kept his word. Lang kept his hands polite. When they finally left with a phone, a tablet, and nothing else, the cameras caught nothing but a closed door. Silence settled. Eli returned through the side, cheeks flushed triumph in his grin. "Mission complete," he announced joy, briefly pushing fear aside. Then Isabel saw her reflection. A woman who had brought trouble to a boy running with a paper bag as if the world depended on him. The truth inside her shifted somewhere dangerous. "Jack," she whispered, "this puts you in the crosshairs. Eli, too. If I leave, if I take the heat with me, you can be safe again." Eli's voice cracked. "Safe without you isn't safe." Jack swallowed hard. He's right. Tears found her. I can't be the reason the knock gets louder. Every hour I'm here, Mason winds the trap tighter. She glanced toward the small guest room. Nothing hers, everything saying stay. I thought I could stand this. Today proved I'm a hazard. "Isabel." "I know," she said, cutting him off with a broken smile. "You'll say, we're stronger together. You'll be right. But strong doesn't always mean wise." Eli ran to her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "Please don't go," he whispered. She bent until her forehead rested on his crown. "I will come back," she said, voice shaking. "I will, but I have to choose the storm that only hits me." Jack stood helpless, watching the woman who had just faced down strangers crumble under the weight of protecting the only two who had believed her without conditions. He stepped in, steady. "If you walk out, I can't guard your back." "I know," she answered, wiping her cheeks. "That's why it has to be me." Night pressed against the windows. Quietly, she took off the borrowed apron that had started to smell like home. She set it neatly on the chair as if order could soften the sound of leaving. At the door, she turned once. "Tell him," she said, nodding toward Eli, "that the ocean doesn't stop being the ocean when it leaves the shore. It just finds another place to kiss the land." Jack's throat burned. And what should I tell myself? She held his gaze, and the first real smile of the day, the kind that remembered sunlight, touched her mouth. "That light you keep talking about. Hold it steady." She tapped her chest. "I'll follow it back." The latch clicked. Cold rushed in and touched everything. The house exhaled, and Jack realized this was what an all-is-lost moment sounded like, not a crash, but a door closing softly because the person who loved you didn't want to wake your pain. Eli's sob found him. Jack knelt, pulled his son tight, and stared at the apron on the chair as if it might tell him how to fight a man who turned lies into weather. His hand found the key in his pocket, the small circle of brass that had opened a secret and a duty. He whispered to the empty room to Mara, to the woman walking into the night. "I'll keep the light." The next morning, Courthouse 3B buzzed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Jack Monroe sat on the worn wooden bench, calloused hands folded in his lap, the brass key in his pocket pressing against his thigh like a heartbeat he couldn't ignore. Eli leaned against his shoulder, small but steady, lending his father the strength he'd always taken for granted. Inside, Isabel was being painted as a thief, a manipulator, a woman who would torch her own company and vanish into smoke. Mason Calder's lawyers had sharpened their knives, and the city had gathered to watch blood spill. Dad Eli whispered, "Why are you here if they don't want you?" Jack looked down. Because sometimes the truth doesn't get invited. Sometimes you have to drag it through the door yourself. The bailiff's voice rang out, "Mr. Monroe. The judge will hear you now." Jack rose, work boots heavy against the tile. He touched Eli's shoulder. "Stay with Ruth. I'll be right back." Ruth's grip tightened on the boy's hand. "Go on, Jack. Light the fire." The courtroom was colder than winter. Mason Calder sat at the front, silver cufflinks gleaming, a smirk coiled on his face like a snake in sunlight. His lawyers flanked him neat and sharp. Across the aisle, Isabel looked pale but unbroken. Her attorney whispered strategy, but her eyes found Jack the moment he entered. The judge, an older woman with iron-gray hair, spoke firmly. "Mr. Monroe, you ask to address this court. Understand that perjury is a crime." "Do you swear to tell the truth?" "I do," Jack said, voice rough but steady. "Then step forward. You have 5 minutes." Jack gripped the microphone. This wasn't his world. His hands knew mops and ladders, not podiums. But truth didn't care about arenas. "I'm not a lawyer," he began. "I'm a janitor. Most days my hands smell like bleach, and the closest I get to power is flipping breakers when the lights go out. But I've seen things, and I can't stay quiet." The room shifted. Journalists leaned closer. Mason arched an eyebrow, amused. Jack pulled the brass key from his pocket, the metal catching the light. "This belonged to Mara Jensen, the auditor who died last year. She gave it to me before she passed. It unlocks a file that proves Isabel Hart didn't steal from her company. Someone else did. Someone who knew how to bury numbers until only smoke was left." Mason's smirk faltered. The judge leaned forward. "Do you have this file?" Jack nodded. "It's secured. It names names, dates, transfers. If the court subpoenas it, you'll see exactly who siphoned millions under Isabel's watch." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. Mason's lawyer rose. "Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay. The man is not a qualified witness." Jack turned eyes hard. "I'm not qualified, you're right. But truth doesn't need a title to stand. It just needs someone stubborn enough to say it out loud." The judge raised a hand. "Objection noted. Mr. Monroe, can you testify under oath that you personally saw this evidence and believe it authentic?" "Yes," Jack answered without hesitation. "I saw the numbers, I saw Mara's notes, and I saw the fear in her eyes the night she told me Mason Calder wouldn't forgive her for keeping a copy." Mason shot to his feet. "That's a lie. She was unstable." The judge's gavel cracked. "Mr. Calder, sit down. You'll have your turn." Silence settled heavy. Isabel's attorney asked Mr. Monroe, "Why would Mara Jensen trust you of all people with something so important?" Jack looked at Isabel. then back. Because janitors see what people leave behind, what they hide in drawers, what they hope no one notices. Mara knew I wouldn't trade her secret for money or power. I've got neither. All I've got is my word, and a boy who'll grow up knowing whether his father stood up when it mattered. The room stilled. Even the lights seemed to pause. Isabel's eyes shimmered not with fear, but with something fierce, something grateful. The judge cleared her throat. "Mr. Monroe, this court will order that evidence to be brought forward and examined. Until then, Ms. Hart remains under review. But this testimony shifts the weight of the scales." Jack exhaled slowly. As he stepped down, Mason leaned across the aisle, voice low. "You just signed your own ruined janitor. I bury men with more armor than you." Jack paused, turned his head slightly. His reply cut sharp. "You can't bury light, Mason. Not when too many eyes are watching." Outside, the winter air bit cold and clean. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted. Ruth shielded Eli through the crowd. Isabel walked beside Jack, her hand brushing his close tethered. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yeah," Jack answered. "I did." She studied him as if seeing not the janitor but the man behind the mop, the father behind the quiet. "What you said about Eli knowing who his father is, Jack, that wasn't just testimony. That was a promise." Jack let the corner of his mouth lift. "Then I'd better keep it." The cameras snapped, capturing two people who refused to bow. But what the lenses missed was the shift in the air the trap Mason had set, now snapping back on him. And as the courthouse doors closed, truth was clear, the janitor wasn't done speaking. 48 hours later, the boardroom's glass walls reflected a storm without rain. The mahogany table stretched like a battlefield. 12 leather chairs lined its edges, each filled with shareholders who wore power like armor. At the head sat Mason Calder, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming against the polished wood. He was a man cornered, but not yet conquered, and the boardroom hummed with anticipation. The doors opened. Isabel Hart walked in with measured grace. Her heels clicked a steady countdown. At her side, to the astonishment of everyone, was Jack Monroe, still in his plain work shirt and boots, shoulders squared, eyes steady. A janitor in a temple of power. Gasps rippled, a few muffled laughs. But Isabel didn't flinch. She pulled out a chair, sat down, and let the silence grow heavy until it pressed against every chest in the room. Mason leaned back, smirking. "You've got to be kidding me. Bringing your janitor to a board meeting. What's next?" Isabel, letting him mop up the balance sheets, Jack didn't rise to the bait. He simply folded his hands on the table. "Funny thing about floors," he said evenly. "You can shine them all day, but if the foundation's rotten, the whole building falls." The room stilled. Mason's smirk twitched. Isabel leaned forward, her voice clear. "We're here because the foundation of Archer & Co. name has been poisoned, and the poison has a name." She slid a folder across the table. "Evidence recovered, authenticated, and now before this board. Every siphoned dollar, every forged signature, every theft traced back to Mason Calder." The shareholders craned their necks. Pages flipped. Murmurs thickened the air. Mason's face tightened. "This is ridiculous," Mason snapped. "You'll believe a janitor and a stack of forged papers over me I built this company. Without me, you'd all still be scrubbing the floor." Jack's voice cut clean through the clamor. "No. Without you, a good woman wouldn't have been driven to fear for her life. Without you, hundreds of workers wouldn't be standing on quicksand wondering if their jobs vanished tomorrow. Without you, Isabel wouldn't have been forced to carry a weight that wasn't hers." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Mason's. "You tried to bury the truth, but it doesn't stay buried. Not when people are willing to dig it back up even if they've only got a mop and a pair of work boots." The words landed. Heavy, unshakable. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Mr. Calder, this documentation is damning. Transfers routed through shell accounts, expense reports doctored." He turned a sharp gaze on Mason. "Do you deny these signatures are yours?" Mason's hand curled into a fist. "I deny everything. This is a setup. By who?" Isabel's voice rang steel, wrapped in velvet. By your hand-picked proxies. By a man who never even sat at this table, or by Mara Jensen, whose death still casts a shadow over this company. The only person who benefits from these lies, Mason, is you. Silence followed. Shareholders exchanged glances. A few shook their heads. The tide was turning. Mason slammed a fist against the table. You think they'll follow you? He spat at Isabel. You think a woman who nearly lost this company can lead them now? You're weak, and dragging a janitor into the boardroom doesn't make you strong. It makes you pathetic. Jack rose slowly, the chair legs scraping the floor with a sound that echoed like thunder. He stood tall, his voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. You're right, Mason. I'm a janitor. But weakness isn't scrubbing floors. Weakness is stealing in the dark because you're too afraid to stand in the light. Weakness is thinking power is about how much you can take. Strength. He glanced at Isabel, then back at the board. Strength is how much you can carry without breaking, and I've watched Isabel carry more than any of you ever could. For the first time, Mason had no comeback. The silence that followed wasn't his ally, it was his sentence. Agatha Whitmore, chairwoman of the board, finally spoke. Her voice was steady as a gavel. Mr. Calder, until a full investigation concludes, you are hereby suspended from all executive duties, effective immediately. Mason's face drained of color. He sputtered, You can't! But the gavel of corporate law had already fallen. 2 security officers stepped into the room, their presence unspoken judgment. Mason's protest dissolved into the stale air of a kingdom crumbling. When the doors closed behind him, the room seemed to exhale. Shareholders leaned back, the tension unwinding. All eyes turned to Isabel. She sat straighter, not triumphant, but resolute. I didn't come here to win a crown, she said softly. I came here to restore what was broken. Archer and Comey deserves honesty. Our workers deserve stability, and our future deserves more than greed. The board nodded, some slowly, some with newfound conviction. And then Jack spoke again, softer now. You've got a chance to rebuild, but remember, foundations don't hold because they're expensive. They hold because they're honest. Don't forget that. It wasn't the speech of a CEO, just the truth, and in that room full of power, truth had never sounded louder. Afterward, as the boardroom emptied, Isabel lingered. She stood by the tall windows, city lights burning beyond the glass, her reflection caught between past and future. Jack walked up beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, she turned to him, voice quiet. You didn't just defend me in there, Jack. You gave me back my voice. He shrugged lightly. Voices don't stay lost. Sometimes they just need someone to clear the noise. Her lips curved into something rare, something almost fragile. And what about you? When do you get yours back? Jack glanced toward the door where Eli and Ruth waited beyond the glass, his boy's small hand pressed to the window like a promise. Maybe I already have. Their eyes met, and in that silence a truth passed between them, unspoken, undeniable. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time they weren't fighting alone. The rain had stopped by the time Isabel left the boardroom behind. The storm had passed, yet the city still shimmered with puddles that caught both neon light and moonlight. She didn't go home. Instead, her steps carried her to a place she had locked away for months, her late mother's studio sealed like a memory too heavy to touch. When she pushed the door open, the air rushed at her turpentine old wood dust. Canvases leaned against the walls like forgotten sentinels. A cracked leather stool rested beneath skylights that still drank in the faint glow of the city. It was a room of beginnings, left abandoned in grief. Jack followed quietly, his boots soft against the concrete. He stopped at the threshold, unwilling to intrude. Isabel turned, offering him a tired but luminous smile. This was hers, she whispered. Every brushstroke, every canvas, it was her heart. I swore I'd keep it alive, but instead I buried it. Jack stepped inside, his hand brushing the frame of a canvas hidden under a white sheet. Sometimes we bury things, he said gently. Not because they're gone, but because we're not ready to see them again. Isabel pulled the sheet away. Beneath it lay a half-finished painting. A sunrise caught mid-breath, strokes of gold and violet straining against a horizon of black. Her eyes stung. She called it tomorrow, Isabel murmured. She never finished it. Jack studied the canvas, his voice steady. Then maybe it's waiting for you. Her throat tightened. I'm not an artist, Jack. He smiled quietly. Neither am I. But I know what it feels like to keep something alive just by showing up. Maybe finishing it isn't about making it perfect. Maybe it's about refusing to let it stay unfinished. Her gaze met his fear and hope colliding inside her chest. For the first time in years, Isabel walked to the stool, sat down, and picked up a brush. Her hand trembled until Jack laid his rough, calloused hand over hers. Steady, he murmured. The canvas doesn't judge. It only receives. Hours passed. The sound of brush against canvas filled the silence, mingling with the hum of the city outside. Jack busied himself with small, quiet tasks, sweeping the floor, arranging brushes, fixing a broken easel leg. With each motion, the forgotten studio began to breathe again. At last, Isabel set the brush down. I thought strength was building towers, making deals, sitting at the top, she said softly, eyes on the painting. Her unfinished strokes now blazed with raw light. But this is strength too, isn't it? Picking up where someone else left off, carrying forward what matters. Jack held her gaze. Strength, he said, is knowing what not to bury. The weight of those words stayed between them. By dawn, soft light spilled through the skylights, touching the canvas. Isabel's brush had captured something trembling and true, not her mother's hand, but her own heart. A tear slid down her cheek. Jack stepped closer, voice low. It's beautiful. She let out a shaky laugh. It's messy. Messy is honest, he said, and honest lasts longer than perfect. Silence settled alive with unspoken things. Their shoulders brushed the air, charged with something neither dared to name. Jack, she whispered, her voice breaking. Why did you really stay by my side? You could have walked away 100 times. He didn't look away. Because when I saw you fighting for something bigger than yourself, I remembered who I was before life broke me, and maybe I wanted to believe there was still a man worth standing beside you. Her breath caught her eyes shining. There is. The words lingered fragile and unguarded. Warmth spread through Jack's chest, a warmth deeper than any sunrise. The sound of small footsteps broke the moment. Eli stirred from where he had curled up in a blanket. Rubbing his eyes, he pointed at the painting. Is that tomorrow? He asked sleepily. Isabel bent down, brushing his hair back. Yes, sweetheart, she whispered thickly. That's tomorrow. Eli's smile spread drowsy but bright. It looks like hope. Jack's throat tightened. He looked at Isabel, who was blinking back tears, and for the first time in years he believed his son was right. Later that morning, Isabel stood before the canvas, Jack and Eli at her side. She touched the edge of the frame with gentle fingers. This isn't just my mother's studio anymore, she said quietly. It's ours now, a place to remind us that no matter how dark it gets, tomorrow is always waiting to be painted. Jack nodded, his voice steady but full. Then let's make sure we don't waste it. And as sunlight stretched across the floor, the three of them stood there together, not just survivors of yesterday's storm, but builders of tomorrow's dawn. 3 months later, at the Lighthouse Initiative Launch Gala, the lights rose on a different kind of runway. The auditorium glowed in a golden hush. Rows of faces filled the hall. Business leaders in sharp suits, social workers with weary compassion in their eyes, single mothers clutching the hands of their children. Yet, when the spotlight came alive, every gaze turned to the woman at the podium, Isabel Hart. She stood taller than she had in months, her dark hair swept elegantly back. Her voice, once fractured, now carried steady and sure as she unveiled the initiative that had risen out of ashes and been rebuilt with light. This isn't just about funding. Isabel, said her words echoing across the room. It's about dignity, the dignity to rebuild the courage to believe again. Because I know what it feels like to lose everything, and I know the miracle of someone offering a hand instead of turning away. Her eyes found the front row. Jack broad-shouldered and grounded, pride burning quietly in his gaze. Beside him, Eli swung his small legs, clutching a folded paper tight against his chest. Applause thundered through the hall, but Isabel raised her hand gently. "Before I finish, there's someone else who has something to say." Eli hopped down from his chair, sneakers thumping against the wood. The crowd, hushed breath caught in their throats as the boy stood at the microphone. His voice was soft but unwavering. "I wrote a poem," Eli said. "It's about light, and about home." He unfolded the wrinkled page and began. "Light isn't loud, but it finds you. Even when you hide. It slips under doors, waits in empty rooms, and whispers, 'You're not forgotten.' Home isn't walls. Home is the hand that reaches for yours, the voice that stays, the chair that never feels empty again. I thought I lost my mom forever, but tonight I see sometimes the world gives you another, and maybe, just maybe, we can be a family again." By the final line, Eli's voice quivered, his hands trembling as he lowered the paper. For a beat, silence. Then sniffles. A muffled sob. Tissues, rustled handkerchiefs passed quietly down rows. The entire room dissolved into tears. Isabel pressed her hand against her mouth, her own sobs breaking free. Jack rose and joined his son on stage, resting a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. Eli leaned into him and whispered, "I think Mom would have liked it." Jack's voice cracked as he answered, "She would have loved it, son. She would have loved it." Then he turned toward Isabel. The janitor, who had once lived in the shadows of grief, now stepped forward into the light. In his hand glinted a small brass key, the one Mara had left behind, the one that had unlocked more than just a door. Jack held it out, the stage lights catching its shine. "There's no door left to fear," he said, voice low but carrying to the farthest corner. "Not for you, not for us. If you choose it, this key means you're home." Isabel's breath caught. Her hand trembled as she reached, but Jack didn't let go immediately. "Stay," he whispered. "Not because you need a place, not because you need redemption. Stay because we need you. I need you." Gasps rippled through the audience. Everyone knew instinctively what was unfolding. Tears streamed down Isabel's face as she closed her fingers over the key, pressing it to her chest. Her voice broke. "Jack Monroe, are you asking me to—" He cut her off, raw and unpolished, but truer than any diamond. "I'm asking you to be family, to marry me, to make this house a home again. Not Mara's, not mine, ours." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then Isabel's sob broke through, but it wasn't sorrow, it was release. She nodded, breath hitching. "Yes," she choked out. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you." The hall erupted. Cheers crashed like waves. Applause, laughter through tears, strangers embracing in the aisles. Women clapped until their palms stung. Others simply wept into the shoulders of whoever was closest. Jack pulled Isabel into his arms, the brass key warm between their palms. Eli wedged himself in his small arms, wrapping fiercely around them both. And for the first time in years, Jack realized he wasn't carrying the weight of loss alone. He had found light again through a boy's poem, a woman's courage, and a love that chose to stay. The Lighthouse Initiative was born that night, yes, but something greater was born too, a family not defined by blood, but by choice. By choosing to see light in each other, even in the darkest nights. When the applause finally faded into soft murmurs, Eli tilted his head up at them, his eyes impossibly clear. "Dad," he whispered, "can we go home now?" Jack tightened his arm around Isabel's waist, his lips brushing her temple as he answered for them both. Home, finally. And that is where this story leaves us. A reminder that sometimes family isn't bound by blood, but by the choice to stay. That even in the darkest seasons of our lives, love can turn a broken key into the door of a new beginning. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Share your city, your story, your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of listeners who believe in stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of what truly matters. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending your precious time with this story. Until the next one, stay safe, stay kind, and never stop believing in second chances.